You're listening to Virtual for West with me, Tara McCarthy, and my co-host, Brittany Patabone.
Today we're talking with Jack Posobiec. Jack is a filmmaker, author, veteran, and an extremely effective activist for Donald Trump during the election cycle. Thank you so much for joining us, Jack.
It is so great to be here, guys. I'm really, really happy. I've been looking forward to this.
Oh,
Awesome.
fantastic. So I wanted to ask you about your documentary in Sweden. Please give us an overview of how you got the idea of doing it and what you found out while you were doing it.
Yeah, so our documentary that we put out with myself, with Cernovich Media, it's called Invasion: How Sweden Became the Rape Capital of the West. And it really came about not too long after the beginning of the new year in 2017. We were sort of talking about wanting to expand what we had been doing during the election in terms of rooting out stories and finding stuff that people weren't talking about. And we thought, why not cover Sweden? Because so much is going on there, and the mainstream media completely refuses to highlight the truly horrific things that are happening. And when things do happen, they sort of tend to bottle it up and make it seem like one event just happened and it's only one thing. And the U.S. does that a lot too. You'll find stuff usually when it's like inner cities or something like that. They'll say, oh, there was one killing, or in Sweden it'll be there was one rape. And then they won't connect it to anything else. But then if you string those stories together, and then we started seeing headlines like car bombings that were going on in Sweden. Like, car bombing? What do you mean a car bombing? Didn't we used to call that like an IED in a car or a vehicle? And how come nobody's talking about this? Where's the story then about the massive car bombings, 70 of which were going on last year in Sweden, thousands of rape cases all of a sudden, and media is completely silent on it. So we ended up going over very early. It was actually before the inauguration, before Deplorable, all that stuff. I got to meet you, and we filmed everything. Then as we were in the editing process, really, is when Donald Trump made his big statement about last night in Sweden was sort of the hashtag that came out of it. And people were talking about what's going on in Sweden, what's going on. And we really wish that we had actually had the thing done for that. It would have been a really happy, sort of meeting right there. But we're still kind of crunching some of the numbers. We were waiting for some of the stuff to get back from our editor at that point. And so we didn't want to go half-cocked with it. I kind of put out like a preview version for everyone to see, and we're currently working on the final version of it. I just actually saw it for the first time this morning, and I gave it a thumbs up. I had a couple notes, but it was really, really good. So what we're doing in ours that's a little bit different than if you guys saw what Tim Pool did when he went over and sort of had a camera follow him around for a few days. He did a great job of going around and showing what the scene is like on the ground. He went into some of the no-go zones. We go into the no-go zones as well. We go in and talk to places where attacks happened, where the New Year's Eve attack actually happened. It had just happened about a week before. We talked to the person who films this incredible footage of it's Muslim migrants, and they're shooting fireworks, not like bottle rockets, actual fireworks at people in the square of this city, Malmo, down right in southern Sweden. And the police aren't even on the scene. They're not even doing anything. And so as we're going there and showing this stuff, we then take it a step back and we say, okay, what we're going to do is actually crunch the numbers on this. How many rapes happened in Sweden? How many migrants have Sweden taken in? What's the percentage from before to what it is now? And we're actually able to break down that 77% of all the rapes happening in Sweden now, over 5,000 last year, are being done by just 2% of the population, and that being Middle Eastern males. And so to get that number, and we're not pulling that number off the internet or something, that actually comes from the Swedish National Crime Advisory Board. So these surveys that come out of the Swedish government and the Swedish police forces. But if you go and actually talk to people in Sweden, they'll say, oh, we're not allowed to talk about that. The media doesn't talk about that. They're not even allowed to report crimes in terms of demographics. They can't tell you the age. They can't tell you the race. They can't tell you the background of the attacker. They'll simply say, oh, there was an attack. But if you dig down into it, like these people actually did, and then we did for the documentary, and so we say, okay, but what country of origin or what background of origin was the person? Then we're actually able to see and put those numbers together. So 77, almost 80%, almost 80% of the rapes are being done.
Just quickly ask you, What do you say to the people who say, well, isn't it just because Sweden has changed the definition of how they class rape or something along those lines, and that's reflecting weirdly in the numbers and screwing the numbers? I mean, what do you say about that?
Yeah, so that was actually something that came up to us as well, that people were responding about this definition. And what's great is then in terms of that is the numbers we're looking at, it's not affected by that definition. All that changed was 2005. All that changed was the legal definition of rape. So essentially, they're now including like harassment, sexual assault under that for a legal criminal definition. But the surveys that we're talking about that are coming out from this crime advisory board, they've always used the exact same definition since the 90s, even going back into the 80s. They've always used the same definition of rape from that time into now.
Right.
And we actually spent some time going over to Denmark and to Copenhagen and contrasting it with the numbers there. Very, very similar, country, very similar culture, very similar people, but they don't have this massive influx of migrants, and so it's like a fraction, a tiny fraction of the rape cases that you see in Sweden.
Okay, so you're actually going by these crime surveys rather than convicted criminal kind of numbers. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Because those convictions and those criminal numbers, they're not even giving you demographic information. They're not.
Okay.
They're totally bottled up. They're totally whitewashed in the truest sense of the word. You're not getting anything accurate out of these things. They made it illegal to actually say what the racial or demographic background of anybody is when you're reporting it through crime statistics. So you've got to go through these surveys, which are self-reported again. So as you can imagine, how many of these things are going on in the no-go zones? How many of these things are going on that go unreported anyway? Just as sexual assault and rape has a proclivity to kind of be something that a lot of people don't want to self-report for various reasons, self-shame and embarrassment and things like that. And so it comes to a situation where there's this much that's being reported, and we can't even estimate how much is going on that's not being reported.
Well, do you think that a lot of it's being stifled? Like, why is Sweden being so deceitful about their numbers then, in your opinion?
So we actually talked about that, and with the guy that I met with, an activist there who filmed what was going on in Malmo, he talked about how, and it was interesting because he's not, I'm pretty political. I wear it on my sleeve that I'm a Trump supporter, stuff like that. This guy, he was literally just a local activist that cared about what was going on in his community, and he wasn't a conservative at all. And when I went to talk to him and said, what was the reception of the Swedish media and the Swedish government when your film came out? And he said, well, they immediately called me a racist. They immediately called me a Nazi. They immediately called me every name under the sun, xenophobic, everything. He said, I'm just trying to show what happened here in our city. I'm just trying to show the truth about what's going on. I mean, this happened. People were hurt. He's like, I didn't tell them to shoot, fireworks at anybody, but they did. But all of a sudden, they did everything they could to discredit him, to tie him to alt-right and various things, and all the different words they use to sort of discredit conspiracy theorists. But it seems like it's this huge narrative that's being pushed. And one thing that we break out in the film as to why. So I think that's something that a lot of pieces that have been done about Sweden or just sort of the migration into Europe in general and a little bit into the United States, why is this happening? Why are people pushing this? Why is there, you can call it the deep state, the globalists, the establishment, whatever word you want to use. Why are they doing it? So we tie it to birth rates. We tie it to the fact that Sweden is one of the least population dense countries in the world and has one of the lowest birth rates at the same time. But they also have this massive welfare system, this massive, cradle to grave welfare system of we're going to take care of you, this nanny state where you're going to get everything, and a huge looming pension crisis that's going on because as their population ages, they don't have enough people that are being replaced in the younger ranks of people who are working. They don't have enough babies being born to replace it, so that you have workers that are paying into this system and then paying off the older people. And we're talking trillions of dollars, at least for the U.S. We're talking billions for Sweden and parts of Europe. This is big time stuff, big time money. So instead of what some countries in like Eastern Europe are trying to fix this by promoting their own populations. Hey, have more kids. We'll give you tax subsidies if you have kids. In Belarus, they have a 3-year maternity leave when mothers have babies, 3 years that they give. So they're trying to promote their own population to have kids. But what it seems that's been happening more and more in Western European countries and the US, it's okay, let's turn to immigrants. Let's get immigrants in however we can get them in, and that'll go to feed this hole in the system.
Hmm.
Oh,
So
interesting.
obviously, something that most people who've looked into this kind of topic are aware that these migrants are not working. Like I think it's like 0.3% of them have jobs. So, and I'm being fairly literal, although that may not be the exact statistic. I mean, is the Swedish government's idea that they're just going to take all their kids, put them all through the government education system, and turn out, some amazing doctors and lawyers or something from this 85 IQ group of people?
Yeah, and that's where the whole thing kind of breaks down in practice, right? If you look at it just as numbers on paper and say, okay, we don't have numbers, we need numbers, let's get numbers,
Hmm.
it makes sense. But then when you have people who, like you said, they come from a culture that doesn't really mesh with the culture in the West. The countries that they come from, they don't even speak the same language. They don't even really fit that well in terms of like Swedish society. The schools, when they do go, sometimes they'll have kids that sit there that aren't even speaking Swedish, but they're mandated to be there. So they sit throughout the classroom throughout the day, and they're not actually learning anything, but they're there and it's being paid for by the Swedish taxpayer, and they're not actually contributing anything. They're just sitting there, and nothing is going towards the
Hmm.
economy.
Well, it seems that very few of them are even open to assimilating. It seems like there's more of a push to convert the Swedish culture into the Islamic culture because their religion or political ideology, whatever you want to call it, is there's no room for them to change. They it's what it says, like Sharia law. They have it. They can't just adapt to Sweden in the way we're seeing that, and also in Germany and France, they're not adapting, they're not assimilating, and in the UK.
We saw that as well, in the sense that actually there were some areas of these no-go zones that were trying to take local votes to allow for their, it could be like a neighborhood or a city block or even just a couple of apartment
Hmm.
buildings that to pressure their city councils to pass an ordinance or a motion, whatever, so to allow their specific area to only fall under Sharia law, and so
Right.
that they wouldn't have to use the actual law of the land that they're in. And it didn't pass. But then what ends up happening is, well, if you don't have government officials going into these no-go zones, and that's what that means. No-go means the government's not going in, the police isn't going in. The people that are there, they're setting up Shura councils, they're setting up their own systems of government, their own forms of government, even a sort of court system, if you will, like a Sharia judicial system, to put it in almost Western terms. But when something happens, when there's an incident, and this is why stuff isn't getting reported, because it all stays internal. It stays internal to their no-go zones. It doesn't get out to the police. It doesn't get out to the judicial system. And it only comes out, when someone dies, when there's a shooting. There were so many shootings when we were there,
Hmm.
so many rapes that were going on, that the stuff that's going on inside these areas isn't even getting out, and they're governing themselves.
Mhm. And it's just
Yeah.
And that's why we call it invasion. That's why we call it invasion.
and it's just amazing to think that the majority of Swedes are just accepting this happen. And I'm not trying to pick on Swedes here. I mean, the majority of Brits are letting a similar thing happen in the UK. If not worse, when it comes to grooming underage girls, which is like the specialty of the ones we got. Um, it's just amazing how brainwashed people have to be willing to just watch this happening. Like the parents of kids, taking them to school, they must see that these other kids don't even speak English, and like how much does it cost to put these kids through a school system? I know in the US it's $10,000 a year, so they're spending 10,000, probably more in Sweden, or I'm not sure, but they're probably spending about $10,000 a year to have these kids who don't speak the native language, sorry, not English, Swedish, sit in the classroom, and if anything, they're just going to take up more time from the teacher away from the other students. And
Hmm.
then of course we see them all, the massive prison population as well, because obviously they all turn to criminal um, criminal behavior as well. So how are people possibly so brainwashed that they're accepting this happening?
So it's something that we definitely came up across. Some of it's in there. Some of we spoke to a few professors, and it comes out. One basic thread, I guess you could say, that it always seemed to come back to was they said, well, we have to help people who are less fortunate. We have to help people that are in need. We have to help. We have to help, and we have to take care of the minorities. And so that was interesting. They said we have to take care of the minorities. And so we were speaking to a couple of Swedes, and we actually said at that point, they said, well, it's interesting because, here in Malmo, the way the population's been going, it's currently about 49% foreign born here in this city. And Malmo, if you look at a map of Sweden, it's right at the southern tip, basically, of Sweden. So it's sort of the entry point into the Scandinavian peninsula and all of Sweden. So that main city right there has been becoming so diverse and so multicultural. Actually, at one point during 2015, they were taking in more people in Malmo from the Middle East than Ellis Island ever did in Ellis Island's heyday, just to kind of give you a comparison.
Mm-hmm.
So we said, it's 49% foreign born at this point. And if trends go this way, I mean, in a year or two, that's going to hit 50%, 51%. So now it's actually going to be a situation where the Swedes are the minority and everybody else
Yeah.
is the majority. And then so do you have any indication, or do you think that they are going to look at taking care of Swedes as minorities the same way that you're talking about taking care of them? And, we asked them that question, and it was like, you got that deer in the headlights fight or flight response of that
Mm-hmm.
does not compute. What do I do? The cognitive dissonance kind of kicked in, and they said, well, that type of thinking is Hitler thinking. We can't have that kind of
Oh,
thinking.
Hitler think. Wrong think right there.
Right. And I said, no, that's not Hitler think. That's math. That's arithmetic. That's percentages. That's numbers. That's not, that's science. You can't deny science. It's numbers.
Mm-hmm. Well, even just reasonably speaking, it's rare that someone is going to, immigrate to a new country and then completely abandon their culture and their way of life and just adopt the new one. They're at least going to be practicing it privately. So, and especially the fact that the immigration is such mass immigration, it's so large that there really isn't time or even there's no demand created for them to assimilate. So that's why they're creating, as you said, almost their own little societies, their little pockets in Sweden, and I'm sure in Germany and France and the UK and wherever else. But yeah, to kind of switch gears a bit, I know you were a strong advocate for Trump during the election cycle. How did you come to be involved in doing so in the first place?
So I, in I guess my past life, I guess you could say, I was sort of one of those nameless, faceless political operatives for the Republican
Mm-hmm.
Party, and I worked on a number of campaigns, some nationals, a lot of in my home state of Pennsylvania, and I got out of it for a while and joined the military, and I just kind of got sick of it. I got sick of the corruption. I got sick of the fact that nobody wanted to do anything different. Nobody wanted to
Mm-hmm.
actually change anything. And I always said, I'm never going to go back to it. I'm done with politics. And I said, I'd never go back unless, there was, and I always kind of held out like, I'll go back maybe if there's somebody that actually wants to do something, someone that actually cares, someone that actually wants to make a difference. And I had
Mm-hmm.
offers to go back. Ted Cruz was trying to hire me at one point, and a few of the other, presidentials. I just wasn't interested. But then when Donald Trump announced, I from that day had already been, I
Wow.
was, wow, so interested. And actually, back in 2011, when Trump stormed the stage at CPAC, I was one of the people with him there, kind of trying to boost him and get him to run in 2012 against Barack Obama. He said
Mm-hmm.
he eventually decided not to, but I had sort of been part of that push. And then looking forward to his announcement, I started reaching out to some of those old contacts, and I said, I want to. Is this for real, guys? If this is for real, I want in. And they said, yeah, it's for real. And so, from that moment on, everything I could do was pushing out with it. So rather than working on the actual campaign, though, I ended up doing the Citizens for Trump, which New York Times actually wrote a piece on us and had us as the largest grassroots Trump supporting organization in the entire country. And so
Wow.
we worked with a lot of people, Roger Stone, Alex Jones, prominently, to get so many different things done during the campaign. And it was actually kind of nice to be outside, sort of in like a parallel structure, So, we were able to do and say things, I could be on Twitter, I could be public, doing and saying things that I wouldn't normally be able to do if I was on a campaign, because you kind of have to let the candidate do that and you're just sort of in the shadows.
Mm-hmm. To kind of actually add to that, you described yourself as a political operative. Can you please expound a bit about what your political operative work entailed?
Do you
Or is
mean
it
like
secret?
in the past or during
Or
2016?
yeah, during Trump's election cycle, like what kind of stuff were
Oh,
you doing
sure.
behind the scenes? Yeah.
Sure. So a lot of it, would be, sometimes it's just the not glamorous stuff of getting petitions to get him on the ballot, early on in the primary session cycle, making sure that he's actually legally on the ballot in every state that he needed to run in. That had to be done actually in
Hmm.
2015, or early, very, very early. We had to set up the structure essentially in early 2015. Then in 2016, we actually had to get it done in like a 4-week span of like every one of the 50 states, and recruiting volunteers for that, finding people for that. And I remember how much the GOP was fighting against us in those days. I remember how much the establishment didn't want Trump to run, and so that's why it's funny that sort of seeing some of the issues that he's been having after his becoming president, especially with legislation and different things he's trying to push. It's kind of funny. It's like, yeah, I remember, back before he won, you guys were not on our side, way back when. So I never really expected this stuff to go smoothly. It's always been a fight every step of the way. So
Hmm.
petitions is one, recruiting volunteers, getting people out to the polls for, if you remember the delegate process in getting to that magic number of 1,237. The media said he'll never do it. Trump will never get to 1237. And reaching out to people, finding people to work at the polls, finding people to run as delegate, figuring out, how to tell people this is the person who is a Trump delegate, as opposed to someone who wasn't one. And then eventually, after he won the nomination, it was, how do we go after Hillary? How do we do opera research on her? How do we attack her? How do we use stuff that's coming out? How do we have our own little, plans and things that are coming up against her? I can't get into every single thing I did, but
Hmm.
one of the biggest ones that I can talk about would be Stop the Steal. Stop the Steal was a vote watch and exit poll program that we ran on election day in about 12 states. We had 7,000 volunteers. And essentially what we were doing was we were trying to target districts where we saw there a high propensity for voter fraud. Um, and this was working with Roger Stone, working with a number of great individuals across the country, and finding places like, okay, Philadelphia is my hometown, so obviously there's a bit of an issue there. So it's basically these big inner cities in swing states where you'd see a lot of these problems with voter fraud. So what we did was we recruited people. We said, have them stand there at the polls all day long and physically count how many people are coming in and out of the voting place. And then if people are interested in talking to you, you go up and you just ask them how they voted. Very simple. We had them dressed completely neutrally. We had them dressed completely unbiased, no electioneering, nothing like that. Don't talk to anybody before they go vote. So there's no intimidation factor here. It's after they vote. If you're interested in talking to us, every person had a tablet. They tallied it up. They put it in. We actually followed a lot of the same type of methodology that the mainstream media uses in their polls. And it's funny because we must have struck gold with that thing or hit something right, because the DNC got so incensed that we were doing this thing. They actually filed a lawsuit against us in federal court
Whoa.
in 4 different states. So that was exciting to see my name in a federal lawsuit by the DNC in Ohio, Arizona, Nevada, and Pennsylvania. At one point, the one in Ohio actually was taken by this really liberal judge that was out there, and they upheld it. And so at one point, I was banned from the state of Ohio from even entering it on election day. We ended up appealing it all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court backed us. They totally backed us. They said, these guys are not trying to intimidate. They took a look at our plan. They said, they're not trying to do anything wrong. They're just simply talking to people after the polls. So after that point, I thought it was funny because we can now thank the DNC for allowing us to become the only U.S. Supreme Court approved exit poll on election day. And I
Wow.
really think that scared them so much that they weren't able to do some of the really nefarious things that they were trying to do in places like Philadelphia or Broward County, Florida, that they would have been able to do to push this election and swing it for Hillary.
Hmm. Wow, that's
Yeah,
insane.
yeah. So it's really worth doing those kind of things. Um,
I would tell you, I've got to plug it, because I am working on a book on all this stuff, and
oh, okay,
I'm in the final stages of it. We're gonna call it Citizens for Trump,
awesome.
the
That's so
inside
awesome.
story of the movement. And the difference is, while most people write books about Trump, I'm writing a book about the movement. My book's about the people.
Very cool. Are you self-publishing, or how are you gonna go about
I'm
getting it out
definitely
there?
gonna self-publish. I've looked
Yeah.
at a lot of different things, and it just seems like this is the 21st century. Why would I use like an 18th century version of publishing? Not gonna do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you already have an
When's
audience, so
hmm when do you expect it's gonna drop?
I wanted to say March, and now March looks like it's come and gone. So we'll see. I want to get it right.
Yeah, that's good.
I was going through and I was putting a lot of anecdotes into it. And then I thought, well, there should be a chapter on, the wall, and a chapter on Hillary calling people basket of deplorables, and a chapter on immigration and why do these issues motivate the base, why, explain. And then somebody mentioned, Jack, you're going to do a chapter on Pepe. And I was like, well, I can't offend Pepe. So I've got to put a chapter in there on Lord Keck and explaining him to everybody and how that all works. And that I want to kind of have it in there too. I want people to be able to pick this up, even if you weren't a Trump supporter, or even if you weren't someone that's a Republican or conservative or anything like that, and you're someone who's completely on the left. I would hope that people could look into this and say, look, okay, you may disagree with every single one of these issues, but if you want to understand why it is that this movement happened and what these people believe, this is the book to read to explain. It's almost like a manifesto in some ways. It's almost
Hmm.
like a manifesto.
Yeah, that's awesome. This election was so just no one could have predicted. It's something you could almost study after it's happened because, yeah, no one could have anticipated or the organic growth of it. Just suddenly, all these people that had never spoken out about anything before stood up. They took a stand. It was amazing to watch and to be a part of, even if only for a little while.
There's been a few, I guess, very nascent populist movements in the U.S. in the past, and I get into a few of those. I get into Teddy Roosevelt's Bull Moose Party. I get into Huey Long back in the 30s and sort of his populist push and trying to do things. But and even Pat Buchanan a little bit, and then Ross Perot in the
Awesome.
90s, where they kind of had this sort of like third option. Sort
Mhm.
of thing where they weren't really a Democrat, weren't really a Republican. They were just sort of, I'm for the working men and women, that you heard Trump say that so many times. And then pushing it out there to say that, this has been said in some ways before, but maybe it wasn't the right candidate. Maybe it just wasn't the right time. And I really do think it's the timing. I always say to every candidate I've ever worked for, I've always said that every race depends on three things. Every campaign, you need the right person at the right place at the right time. If you don't
Mhm.
have one of those three things, you're going to lose. Just simply, you're going to lose. The Democrats could potentially have won if people didn't wake up. And that's why you needed a person like Donald Trump in 2016 to get them to wake up. On the flip
Mhm.
side, if they had someone who was if you didn't have Trump and they had someone who was a better salesman or marketer for their brand other than Hillary Clinton, like if it had been Bernie Sanders versus Marco Rubio or something like that, I don't know. I got to say that Bernie Sanders had an effective way of getting people out, getting people motivated, but it's seen something different.
Mhm.
So you're talking about waking up Americans to what's going on so that they voted for Trump. How do you propose we wake up Europeans to what's going on with this mass migration before things are too late and our entire cities are just kind of taken over by these people with vastly different cultural values?
So you've got to break through the narrative, right? You've got to break through the cognitive dissonance. I mean, we saw it was just yesterday for when we're recording this that London had a horrific terrorist attack right on
Mhm.
Westminster Bridge. I actually, when I was flying over to Sweden, I had a layover in London. We went to Westminster Bridge and we stood there and took selfies and right on that sidewalk. Just a few weeks before this happened. I mean, it's the tourist center of London, and the reason that these attacks keep going on, but people don't really switch up the way they're thinking, is because they've been inundated with one narrative and they're not hearing the other side. They're not hearing it. So we've got to find ways to put these facts out, but also put different narratives out to say that no, it's unacceptable that. So the one thing I've been saying is, how many people have to be killed in terrorist attacks, or women raped, or children, raped, to, I don't know, as sacrifices on the altar of diversity and multiculturalism. So when someone says to me, well, Jack, we have to be diverse, we have to help out the minority, and say, okay, well, how many women are you willing to allow be raped? How many? How many terrorists are you willing, or terrorist attacks are you willing to be allowed to happen? And there's so much focus on the terrorist or the specific person when this happens, and there should be, but there is rarely any talk of the victims. There's rarely any talk of the people who were affected by this. So many people who lost their lives, lost limbs just yesterday on the bridge of London, not London Bridge, but Westminster Bridge. Where is the talk about them? Where is their narrative? Where is their stories? Talk about the victims more. Talk about mothers who have lost people. And that way you're not just making that sort of intellectual appeal, but you're actually appealing to people's emotions and say, you know what? I know that for a lot of those people, there's a hugely emotional aspect of wanting to help other people. I get that. I totally get that, especially in Western Europe, right? But you've got to realize as well that there are people in your own country that need to be helped as well. And if you're covering that up, then you're only hearing one side of the story.
Yeah, it's almost as though there's kind of a quality thing. It's like, well, it's worth our own people being raped and murdered and blown up and run into and everything, as long as we, stop the suffering of these other people, because it's like we're all just exactly the same, so why should we have any kind of preference for our own people kind of thing? I guess that's what they
Exactly. I mean, why don't people talk about, you never hear anyone talk about the refugees from Ukraine. It's always the refugees from Syria, even though the people that come over aren't predominantly from Syria. You never hear about it from Ukraine. You never hear about the massive poverty that's going on in Bulgaria, Romania, Belarus, these huge areas of Europe that have poverty and have problems and with massive amounts of suffering. But for some reason, they're trying to have Europeans look to other parts of the world and say, well, no, this is the suffering that matters more than the suffering in our own backyard.
Yeah, kind of. Well, it's related in a way. The divide over issues like this and many others seems to be growing wider and wider between the right and the left every day. In your opinion, is this fixable, or is it too late?
Well, I wouldn't be out there every day doing what I do if I didn't think it was fixable. I one thing I say is, if this ever does come to a head, we can say, hey, we tried. And hey, we tried to go the peaceful route first, and we tried to do something to fix it. And honestly, I guess I do think it's fixable. And I wouldn't wake up every day and hop on Twitter or go out to the places that I go or hop on an airplane and put myself and others I care about at risk going into these no-go zones in these different areas, because I think that I'm optimistic, I guess. I'm a glass half full kind of person. I really am. I don't know if everybody people always joke that Twitter is a very negative place, but I try to be an optimistic person. And I really do think that if we start changing tactics and instead of appealing to minds, we appeal to hearts a little bit more, I think that people will start to wake up. And I think if they see that, hey, these are real people that are actually being hurt, people that are in our own backyards, people that we know, there was something that happened not too far from where I live, that happened in Rockville, Maryland, not too long ago, this week, where a 14-year-old girl was brutally raped and sodomized by two illegal immigrants in her high school bathroom. 14-year-old girl was raped and brutalized by two 18-year-olds that had been in the country for less than a year. They'd both been illegal. They'd both been known by Homeland Security. They'd both been set free and at the border and allowed to go to live with their family in Maryland, and then given free high school and allowed to be in freshman classes with 14-year-old girls. This was U.S. federal policy under Barack Obama. And so, I went there and covered that. Nobody else was there. Nobody else was covering it. A couple locals, I think Tucker Carlson at least mentioned it the next day, and that after the story got big, that was good. But the look on these people's, because this is inside the Beltway we're talking right here. So, or, just adjacent to it. So this is, I mean, the bluest of the blue kind of liberal, whatever you want to call it, areas. And I had people coming up to me on tape, one grandmother in particular, saying, this completely changed my attitude about so many things. And she actually, in the tape, describes herself as a former bleeding heart liberal because of realizing the gravity of her support and her area's support, her community support for these type of policies. And in her mind, she had always thought about, we just need to help others, we just need to help the less fortunate. But then she realized, oh my goodness, look at the potential ramifications of bringing in people who are completely unvetted, people who are completely unchecked. I mean, there's even a good point some people are making that these guys, they have no papers. Nobody even knows if they're actually 18. They just kind of told you that.
Yeah.
And at some point we took them for it. When I was in the military, it would happen a lot. You get people from, Afghanistan or Syria, and they would say, oh, I was born in the year of 1970, 1972. And you're like, when? I don't know. I was born in that year. And they don't even have the same kind of, numbering system we are. So when I hear people say, oh, we're vetting, we're definitely vetting everybody, it's like, no, you're not. You're not comparing apples to apples here. These are completely different countries with completely different systems, completely different ways of life. And don't tell me that people everything's going to be fine when we've got things like this going on in Europe, in Sweden, and in London, and we've got things that are going on here in Rockville, Maryland.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There are countries out there, especially third world countries, where people don't even know what their own birth date is. And I've even known of people who just made up their birth date, not for any malicious reason, but just simply because they didn't know what it was when applying for a visa. So the thought that these people are going to be like, oh, well, you'll get a refugee visa if you're a child. Like, we have loads of child refugees coming into the UK, and they're all like, at least 25, and with like beards and everything, and it's like, okay, and they get sent to live with foster parents and then get sent to the schools. So for them it's great. They get free housing, free food, free taken care of, free transportation, free education in English or whatever. But the thing is, they're sitting next to 13-year-old girls that they have a habit of raping.
Yeah, a great quote I heard earlier this week was, name any other immigrant group that wouldn't be able to not rape people in the country they're brought into. Very, 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 very serious topic. And so, it was, I don't know, on one hand, it was kind of heartening for me to hear that incident was actually waking people up. But at the same time, it's like, I don't want things like that to continue happening. I don't want it to have to take something like that to get people to wake up.
Yeah,
it's like, is this what it takes? People have to be raped, people have to be murdered, and they have to die and suffer in order for people to wake up. And it's really a shame that that people can't just respond to logic, but it has to be something of that gravity to occur. Really is.
People don't respond to logic and reason as much as you think. It's emotional. It's so emotional, and we've got to start playing that game. People that are awoken to this stuff, people are red pilled, whatever term you want to use. They've got to start realizing that it's the emotional appeal that's going to have more to do. When President Trump mentioned voices in the State of the Union address, how it's going to be a new White House office for the victims of immigrant crime. I mean, you saw the left just completely roiled when he said that. They did not want him to do anything like that. Victims of immigrant crime, well, we can't be doing that. We can't be counting that. That's totally against the narrative. And so we've got to fight them on these narrative battles and use emotion to be able to do that. And so,
but at the same time,
it's got to be truthful. It's got to be truthful as well, because the minute we start playing fast and loose with the facts, then they're going to get us and they're going to discredit us, because we're fighting cognitive dissonance here. We're fighting bias. We've got to use emotion, but we also have to have the facts. And in the documentary, that's exactly what we do. The first 5 minutes are facts just pounded at you.
But don't you think that these people already know, and that's why they don't want us to look at this data or even track the data?
Oh, well, I'm talking more for the general public, I guess I would say. For people that are sort of in the ruling class, the ruling elites, they know exactly what's going on. They know exactly what the risks are. They know exactly what the situation. Barack Obama is a smart guy. Hillary Clinton was a smart woman. They knew exactly what it was that they were selling. They knew exactly what it was they were doing. But to them, the ends justified the means. They said, well, if we've got to have X amount of people killed, if we've got to have X amount of Benghazis happen, if we've got to have X amount of women raped, it's going to be better because we'll be in charge and we'll be able to do a better job than whoever it was before us, Muammar Gaddafi, or, take your pick of these people. And so that's where the devil lies in the details of saying that, it's kind of like communism, right? Well, you ever talk to someone who supports it and they're always like, well, it failed, but just because the people who were running it didn't do a good job, this time it'll work. This will be the chance that it'll absolutely work, and it won't be mass gulags, mass graves, mass economic strife, starvation, even though that's been the result of communism every single time it's tried. And that's the reason that they have those mass gulags. That's the reason that the left wants death camps. The reason they want those prison camps. That if you aren't with the narrative, if you're going against the grain, then that's why they have to throw you in there, because they need to shut you up, because they know what they're doing to pull the wool over people's eyes.
It's crazy, isn't it? It's like they're this crazy for that. They don't, obviously, we don't really care about women because otherwise they wouldn't import rapists. They don't really care about children because otherwise they wouldn't import rapists. So, what do they care about?
It's almost like tribal politics. It's almost like the idea of my group has to beat your group. And so if you're on the other side, if you're not part of my group, then you don't count, then you don't matter. So if you're someone we saw this at the Deplorable that myself and a few of my friends threw in Washington, D.C., when they tried to attack us with smoke bombs, they had tried to attack us with sulfuric acid. They were throwing D-cell batteries. My 54-year-old mother was at this event, dressed up, wearing a gown, high heels, so excited to see her son, and doing this great thing. She was a huge Trump supporter, and they wanted to throw acid at my mother. And so for people that are that far, I mean, you've got to say that they're radicalized. They are, liberal terrorists is simply what it is. They've gotten to the point where they're so far gone that the only thing you can do is find the people that are leading it and press charges and get them in jail, which is essentially what happened. We caught 3 of them with the help of James O'Keefe, and we're able to get them to they pled guilty, which was amazing. And fortunately, no one was really hurt during that thing, but insane, absolutely insane to say that they came and said, you're throwing acid at us, you're burning flags, you're throwing eggs, all this other stuff. Well, why are you doing it? And they said, well, because you're Nazis. And I'm like, wait a minute, why do you not like? Well, wait, because Nazis always use violence. I'm like, but what did you just become? You just became the thing you hate. You just became everything that you're supposed to stand against. Whereas we're just trying to have a party. You guys could rent the room across the street. I don't care. Go do what you want to do. But they can't do it. So that's why they gin up these forces of hatred against us.
What would you like to see happen in the future?
Wow, just in general, or
I know it's a very general question.
On all this stuff, what I'd love to see happen is for people to be able to have conversations about things that are going on in our world, things that are going on in our countries, without the demonization of both sides. That you can talk about things that are basic facts, that are empirical facts and data, things that we've recognized through patterns that go along in, trends that have been going through our cultures for the last 15, 20 years, whatever you want to call it. And instead of having one side demonize the other, we say, you know what? That is an issue. You know what? That is a situation that's going on. And here are some ways that we could deal with it. Here are some ways that would possibly be a better solution than what we have now. But instead, you've got one side, and you could pick any number of these issues, terrorism or the migration or this massive rapes that are going on. And you got one side that completely refuses to even acknowledge that there's a problem going on. It's like, it's like when you're in AA, and not that I have been, but the first step is realizing that there is a problem. And then the only way to get rid of it is to acknowledge that there is a problem. We have to acknowledge it, and we as a people have to get everyone to acknowledge that there is a problem. And if we continue down the road that we're on, it's not going to go well for us.
Yeah. It's like there's so many problems. Sometimes you don't even know where to look. And then, the news incoming every day is always so distracting. I mean, so many things happening. But to
And that's
kind
the
of
point.
like,
That's the entire point.
yeah.
That's the entire point of the news is to get you worried about that, is to get you talking about whatever, and this intel agency was doing that to Trump and certain things. So we're distracted and we're looking at the shiny object and don't focus on the massive elephant in the room.
Hmm.
And what kind of
Yeah.
reception did your Sweden documentary have?
What's funny is so the preview that we put out, the only thing that I've heard from anybody on the left in terms of, well, people that watched it that are on the right and people that are already kind of woken up to a lot of this stuff, they thought it was great. They thought it was very good. They thought it was very well put together. The statistics, they really enjoyed actually having those facts and figures at their hands. So when they got into a situation like that, or if they were dealing with someone who didn't know anything about it, that you could watch it, the first few minutes give you a great overview context of the situation, and then it delves into what's going on. So it's not just one of these, boom, this happened and here's why. It actually goes all the way back to the 70s and leads you from that point on. For people on the left, I think the only thing that I've heard so far was that Louise Mensch, her blog, The Heat Street, that's
Oh
funded
no.
by Hillary Clinton supporter Rupert Murdoch, put out a thing. And they said, well, there's some stock footage in one of your scenes that that village square that you're showing actually isn't in Sweden, it's in Lithuania. And it's like, oh no, stock footage was huge. So we actually were like, wow. I was actually kind of laughing. I said, wow, that's the only thing they could find to hit us on. Meanwhile, they don't say anything about the statistic in front of it about the number of rapes that are going on in Sweden. So they're doing everything they can to minimize and diminish the impact of what's going on. Or it's what they'll do, right? They'll do so much to, it's like when those books of the Clintons come out, right? The Clinton War on Women is a good one, where they'll find like one quote in it that's wrong and say, well, that discredits everything in the entire book. And they say, well, wait a minute. No, these women actually were raped by Bill Clinton. They say, nope, discredited book. We discredit it, move on. Because they don't, that's what it is. They don't want people to see this stuff. They don't want people to read our stuff. And we've just got to keep going out there. We've got to keep using our platforms. We've got to keep using new media, podcasts. I love the fact that you guys are doing this. I've actually listened to every single episode you've done so far.
Wow. Thank you.
I have.
Appreciate it.
I really like it. I really like that you guys are finding people who have alternate viewpoints and giving them a platform and saying, these are discussions that are worthy of having. And if we're not going to have them, where else are they going to be? So it's kind of like with the Trump campaign in the first place, is if we're not going to do it and it's not getting done, then we just have to do it ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, all these kinds of discussions, it's the only way to figure out if there's a problem with what you're doing at the moment, or, if there's a better solution or a better way. Like, you have to pick things apart. You need multiple discussions, but like cutting off communication and trying to suppress speech, and you should never talk to that person, you should never do this. It's just going to harm us in the end. I mean, they're not well, I was going to say the entire world isn't going to embrace a really bad idea, but actually we've seen that.
No.
I mean, at least a large majority of people embrace pretty bad ideas nowadays. So I guess it's just about, we have to keep fighting. I think we just have to speak louder and more, because the fight is to silence us. So that's the only way to come at it twice as hard.
The late great Andrew Breitbart, who I did have the pleasure of working with at one point, just a few weeks before he died. He had this amazing quote where he said, politics is downstream of culture. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we need. Yeah. We need new culture. We need to be out there doing media, movies, books. Like, obviously, you're a novelist as well. I actually just finished your novel. It was excellent. And putting stuff out there that has our values in it, putting stuff out there that isn't necessarily political, nonfiction, hard news type stuff, but putting stuff out there that's cultural. Baked Alaska does music. I've been telling him he should do some more music, get some songs out there. Like, that's going to get more people. And meme culture is a great example of that, because it brings in people where you're making somebody laugh, you're making somebody cry, you're making somebody feel empathy for somebody else. That is going to go a lot further in terms of getting these views out there, getting these views accepted, and even just getting these discussions allowed to be had in the open. Because isn't that what we were supposed to, all throughout the Cold War, weren't we told that we're the West and we're freedom of speech and we're the open society, we're the free world, and the other side is the side of corruption and closing down and Big Brother? And it's like, look how the look how the times have changed.
Yeah,
look how the times have changed.
Talking about Big Brother, I mean, are you worried about what's happening with social media companies and, Google and everything, just kind of shutting people down, demonetizing people's videos or closing people's Twitter accounts and, censoring certain links from being shared on Twitter or Facebook or whatever? Are you worried about this?
Every single day I go to sign into my Twitter account, I'm amazed that it hasn't been blocked yet. every single day. And look, you've just got to take it as an inevitability. So live every day to its fullest, right? You never know when your time's coming. It's a line in the Bible. They say the Lord comes like a thief in the night. But it's kind of like that. You've got to do what you can. You've got to open your voice as much as you can and have multiple platforms. That's what so many people don't see that. Twitter isn't the only thing. Gab is out there. Facebook is out there. YouTube is out there. Go and do those different things. And they will try to deplatform us. They're absolutely going to deplatform us. So many people are going to get blocked. So many people are going to go. When you step outside of that Overton window a little bit too far, and they shut you down, they cut you off, and you see what happens. So I would just say to people, go out there and keep doing what you're doing. If you don't have any platform, make your own website. And if you can't do that, then find somebody who's got one and be on theirs.
Yeah, because what we put out into the world, it represents us. And if we're not putting anything out into the world, like writing books, like starting shows, making music, whatever, then there's nothing to represent us. And I just feel like just so many of us, at least on the right, have been silent in that area for far too long. So the left has the dominant position, and pretty much all of the, entertainment, music, etc., all of it represents their point of view.
Yeah, when I first got involved in politics, and we're going back, 2004, 2005, and you'd go to like CPAC or something like that, and it would be, I'm telling you, the bow ties, and here's a 12-page report we did on why healthcare should be privatized and this stuff. And it's like, guys, we're only talking to ourselves here. This is the most boring stuff. You are not going to get a single vote. You're not going to convert a single person if you're just going to sit up there and talk at them. You've got to actually go out into the street. You've got to go online. You've got to find people, and you got to speak their language. You can't just expect them to come and play off of your sheet of music. Don't work that way.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that younger people are getting more involved now?
I really do, and it's amazing. It's so great because the left went too far, right? The left went way too far in the 60s and 70s. They were the counterculture. They were the hippies. They were the rebels. But as they grew up, more and more, they took over institutions, they took over campuses, they took over media, and then suddenly, guess what? They became the establishment. So it's hilarious when they still try to continue to fight like they aren't the establishment. It's like, guys, you've been in power for how many decades now? No, sorry, you're not. We're the rebels now, and we're going to continue to be the rebels against what you guys are doing. And the more you want to shut us down, the stronger we're going to get, because there's something very youthful about that and very appealing to youth of, youth always want to chafe at the status quo. And it just so happens that at this point in history, the status quo is them, not us. And we're the ones that are hungry. We're the ones that are fighting back. And if you've seen what's going on with Brexit, Nigel Farage, with Donald Trump in the U.S., we're winning, not them.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. Okay, so we've actually come to the end of our show now. It's been wonderful to have you, though. Thank you, Jack. Where's the best place for people to find more about your work?
Twitter is definitely my flagship, so it's at Jack Posobiec, JackPosobiec. But I've got a mean Periscope account, and I'm trying to up my YouTube game. I'm trying. Awesome. That's what this green monstrosity is behind me right here.
We'll link all the pertinent links below. So
yeah. And thanks to our audience for listening to this week's episode of Virtual for West. If you like this show, please make sure you subscribe. And if you know a friend who might enjoy this episode, please share it with them. You can also find Brittany's award-winning book, Hatred Day, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Audible.
And remember to check out... Oh, yeah, thank you. I just wanted to add, make sure to check out Tara's other podcast, The Reality Call Show, for in-depth interviews with scientists, philosophers, and thought leaders. Thank you once again for listening, and thank you once again, Jack. It's been wonderful.